There is a book so dangerous that the people who shaped the Bible decided the world shouldn't read it. It was quoted in the New Testament, revered by early Christian writers, considered sacred scripture by an entire ancient church, and then, quietly, deliberately, it was pushed to the margins, hidden, forgotten, surviving only in the highlands of Ethiopia for over 1,000 years. The Book of Enoch. And the story it tells about 200 angels who descended to earth and broke the foundation of creation is the story most people were never meant to hear. Until now. Before the flood, before the first kingdom, before the first wall of the first city was ever laid in stone, the earth was watched. Not from satellites, not from towers, from above, by beings called the Irin, the Watchers, celestial sentinels stationed at the boundary between heaven and earth, assigned a single sacred task: observe humanity, guard the line between the infinite and the mortal, be present but never cross over. For ages beyond counting, they held that position. But here is the thing about watching something for long enough. You begin to feel it. And feeling, for a being designed to remain beyond feeling, is where everything begins to unravel. The Watchers saw the daughters of men, and something that should have remained dormant inside them woke up. Not love, not compassion, something older and darker. Desire, possession, want. The question that has haunted scholars for centuries is not whether this happened. The question is why. Why would beings who had witnessed the architecture of creation, who had stood in the presence of the divine, choose to descend into something so much smaller? What is it about longing that makes even the highest things want to fall? Their leader was named Semyaza, and I want you to sit with what he said before any of them descended, because it is the most chilling line in the entire Book of Enoch. He gathered the 200 and spoke his fear aloud. I am afraid that perhaps you will not be willing to do this deed, and I alone will be guilty of a great sin. He knew, before the oath, before the first step off the precipice of heaven. He looked at what they were about to do and named it clearly. A great sin. Not a mistake, not a gray area. A great sin. And his fear was not that they would fail. His fear was that he would be the only one who didn't turn back. So the others answered him. 200 voices. And what they said is either the most human thing ever uttered by non-human beings, or the most terrifying. Let us all swear an oath. Let us bind one another with curses so that none of us changes his mind and abandons the plan. An oath sealed with curses, not to guarantee success, to prevent repentance. They built a prison around their own conscience before they even began. They knew some part of them might still listen to the voice that said stop, and so they silenced that voice in advance. Have you ever done that? Made a decision you knew was wrong, and then surrounded yourself with reasons you couldn't back out? Told so many people, committed so publicly, moved so fast, that turning around became unthinkable? The Watchers were doing something ancient and terrifyingly familiar. They chose Mount Hermon. That choice matters more than most people realize. In Hebrew, the root of the word Hermon, cherem, means a sacred ban, something set apart for destruction, something devoted to judgment. The name carried its own verdict before a single one of them had landed on its slopes. The night of the descent, the sky above Hermon did not darken. It tore open. A luminosity that was neither star nor fire, but presence poured down toward the summit. One by one, 200 beings stepped out of the architecture of heaven and into gravity, into cold air, into the weight of a world that was never designed to hold them. The mountain received them. And creation in that moment tilted. But here is the part of the story that most people never get to. Because most people stop at the scandal, angels taking human wives, and miss the deeper horror. The Watchers did not come empty-handed. They brought knowledge. Azazel, one of their chiefs, taught men to forge swords, knives, shields, and breastplates, the full geometry of war. To women, he taught the use of cosmetics and ornaments, the art of beauty divorced from truth, of appearance weaponized. Others taught enchantment, root cutting for sorcery, astrology, the reading of omens in the movements of celestial bodies, the manipulation of natural forces for human gain. Now stop and look at that list. Really look at it. Warfare, vanity, divination, control. Every single one of those gifts sounds on the surface like progress, like empowerment, like knowledge. And that is precisely what makes this moment so dangerous and so modern. The Watchers didn't destroy humanity with a weapon. They corrupted humanity with acceleration. They injected capabilities into a civilization that hadn't yet developed the wisdom, the conscience, the depth of soul to use them without becoming monstrous. They gave humanity the tools to dominate before humanity had learned to question whether domination was the point. Tell me that doesn't sound like right now. We split the atom decades before we fully grasped what we were unleashing on our descendants. We connected every human mind on Earth through a single network before we understood how that connection could be turned against us. We are building artificial intelligence that outpaces every ethical framework we've tried to construct around it. The gifts of premature knowledge keep arriving, and we keep reaching for them because they are dazzling, because they feel like power, because in the moment you hold them, you feel like a god. The Watchers knew that feeling. It's how they ended up on the mountain. Then came the children. The Nephilim. Enoch's description of them is one of the most viscerally disturbing passages in all of ancient literature. Giants. Beings of extraordinary size and appetite, born from the union of the divine and the human. They consumed the produce of the earth until the earth was stripped bare. They consumed the animals. They turned on each other. And then, inevitably, they turned on humanity. The world that had been young and breathing became a slaughterhouse. Blood soaked into soil that had never been designed to receive it at that volume or velocity. Violence stopped being an aberration and became the weather, the permanent, ambient condition of existence. Children were born into it. They had no memory of anything else. And here is the moment in the story that hits like a physical blow. The earth itself cried out. The Book of Enoch says the corruption of the world rose upward and breached the gates of heaven. Not a metaphor, not a theological figure of speech. The suffering was so vast, so unrelenting, so absolute, that it tore through the boundary between worlds. It was heard. 4 archangels looked down: Michael, Uriel, Raphael, Gabriel. They saw what the earth had become. and they moved with a purpose that was neither rage nor sorrow, but something more absolute than either: judgment. Raphael was sent to Azazel. He was cast into a desert wasteland, covered with jagged stones, left in darkness. Not destroyed, not forgiven. Buried alive in full awareness, with nothing to do but feel the weight of every consequence of every choice, compounding forever until the final accounting. Imagine that. To be fully conscious in the dark. To have no distraction, no escape, no sleep deep enough to stop the understanding of what you chose. Just time and consequence. Gabriel was sent to the Nephilim, not to save them, but to set them against each other, to let the violence they had seeded into the world turn inward. The monsters would become their own undoing. Michael was sent to bind Semyaza and the remaining watchers beneath the hills of the earth for 70 generations, held there, waiting. Not destroyed, waiting, fully aware of every sunrise above them they cannot see. And the earth would be washed. The flood was not an outburst, it was a response. A cosmic reset performed on a world that had been infected at the root. And before the waters came, there was one more chapter. The strangest and most extraordinary chapter of all. The Watchers, now imprisoned, now understanding with terrible clarity what was coming, begged for mercy. They asked Enoch, of all beings, to intercede for them, to carry their petition to the throne of heaven, to argue their case before the very presence they had turned their backs on. And Enoch agreed. What happened next has no parallel in any other ancient text. He was taken through the 7 heavens, not in a dream, not in a trance, carried through layers of fire and crystal, and silence so absolute it had weight, through the chamber where the stars are held like instruments, through the place where fallen light exists in chains, and finally, into the presence that sits at the center of everything that is. Try to imagine that journey for a moment. The further Enoch traveled, the smaller everything he had ever known became. Every fear, every question, every grief, all of it dissolving into something so vast it had no edges. And somewhere in the middle of that vastness, the petition of the Watchers was presented. The answer was final, not cruel, not furious, just final. The mercy they sought was not denied because mercy was absent. It was denied because their choice had been made in full knowledge. They had seen the divine. They had known the sacred trust. They had sworn an oath designed to silence their own conscience. That kind of choice, eyes open, alternatives refused, consequences acknowledged in advance, carries a weight that ordinary forgiveness cannot absorb. The judgment stood. The flood came. The world was remade. But the story doesn't end there. Because the story never ends. It just changes costume and walks into the next age. The Watchers are not a closed chapter of prehistory. They are a pattern. The guardian who becomes the predator. The holder of sacred trust who uses access and proximity to feed appetite rather than serve duty. The teacher who exploits. The leader who plunders. The institution that begins as sanctuary and ends as machine. We keep meeting them. Because power without wisdom doesn't age. It just finds new vessels. And the knowledge they gave us, that accelerated, conscience-free, dazzling, and destructive knowledge, we are still inside it. We are still navigating a world shaped by gifts we weren't ready to receive. Choices made before we arrived that we are now responsible for carrying. That is not cause for despair. It is cause for honesty. Mount Hermon still stands, cold and ancient, rising above borders that didn't exist when the oath was sworn on its slopes. The earth that cried out in the age of the Nephilim has been reshaped 1,000 times over. And yet, something in it still remembers. Something in us still remembers. The question the Book of Enoch leaves you with, the question I want you to carry into the rest of your day, is this. The Watchers had every reason not to fall. They had seen glory. They had known truth. They fell anyway, because they chose desire over duty, and then bound themselves in oaths to make sure they couldn't choose again. You, right now, are choosing every day. Every time you hold the line when something in you wants to cross it. Every time you refuse the oath that would lock you into your appetite. Every time you use whatever power, knowledge, or influence you hold in service of others rather than yourself, you are doing what the Watchers refused to do. That is not a small thing. The line is always high in the celestial realms, and it is always right in front of you. Tell me, which part of this story landed hardest for you? Do you see the pattern of the Watchers playing out in the world around you today? Leave your thoughts below. I read every single one. And if this kind of storytelling is what you're looking for, subscribe. Because next time, we follow Enoch further than anyone was meant to go. Through the 7 heavens, into the chambers where fallen stars wait in chains, into the place where the future is written in light and the past is never truly buried. What he saw there will change the way you look at the night sky. Don't miss it.